Okay, desperate in prayer, increasing hunger for God through fasting, and some objectives for this session that we would look at and consider the benefits of fasting, try to remove some of the common misconceptions about fasting, and then I really would like to encourage you to consider including fasting in your spiritual disciplines. Perhaps some of you already are. At the risk of violating Matthew 6, which says, don't let other people know that you're fasting by putting oil on your face and not looking upset. How many of you have fasting as a regular part of your spiritual disciplines? Can you tell me? But just look happy. Don't look sad. Okay. All right. God commands us to seek our satisfaction in Him. He's to be our ultimate source of satisfaction and joy. And one of the ways that we glorify Him is actually by seeking our contentment and our fulfillment in Him. When we get our joy from God, He is seen as great. The reason for that is because we glorify whatever it is that we pursue to bring us peace or pleasure. And He promises to provide everything for us that we need. So when we get what we need in God, then He's glorified. Similar to the Psalm 50, I wouldn't ask you if I needed something. I don't need anything. I own it all. But when you ask me, then I would give you, then I would be glorified. You'd be filled. So how can we increase our hunger for God, our appetite to be satisfied in God? How can we become desperate for Him if we're not? That was one of the earlier sessions. We don't pray a lot because we're not desperate enough. Okay, well, how can we increase that desperation without asking Him to give us a terminal disease or one of our loved ones, get significantly hurt or something like that? How can we have that increased in us? How do we know if we're dependent on the invisible God or on the visible things around us? How can we test that? How can we know that? I believe that one neglected help in the Christian arsenal for sake of that testing, how do we know what we're satisfied in? And how can we increase our satisfaction, make sure that it is in God, is the spiritual discipline of fasting. Fasting was not a popular practice among Christians when I was growing up, at least. I think I heard the word fasting, and when I got old enough to start reading the Bible, I certainly saw it in there, saw men doing it. I didn't actually know anybody who fasted for a lot of my Christian life. Fasting seemed like one of those things from far away, from long ago, something that the really religious people did who didn't understand that Christianity was actually about a relationship. Fasting seemed like something connected to the ritual, the religious piece, not the relationship. I don't remember hearing anyone teach about it. I definitely don't remember hearing a pastoral or shepherding call to a group of people to do it. Anybody who was from a non-Gandhi, Gandhi fast, I watched the movie. He fasted a lot. He was very skinny. Any non-Gandhi Protestant fasters that I heard about were fasting because they were in some dire situation. So their child or their spouse got critically injured or got diagnosed with brain cancer or something like that. So for all those reasons, and probably because it just seemed miserable, I'm going to be hungry. I didn't really start fasting until probably 9 or 10 years ago. Don't applaud because I fast, because then I lose my reward, okay? But we're talking about it. It was not a part of my spiritual exercise program until somewhat recently. So why don't we fast? In some cases, probably even a lot of cases, is probably just not on the radar. Maybe it's ignorance in terms of just not knowing about it. Not like people are foolish, it's just they're not familiar with it. They don't know that it's something that modern Christians could or should do, let alone then how to do it. In other cases, maybe they actually received misinformation about it and maybe even were steered away from it for spiritual reasons. I think what provoked me to start considering it was a book that I read titled A Hunger for God by John Piper. And his answer to the question of why we don't fast is that we settle for less than God. Our longings for God are too weak, and as he preaches often, we're satisfied with God's gifts rather than with the giver himself. Now, I do believe that God gives great gifts to his people, and gives great gifts as signs of his blessing and for our joy. I believe that every good and perfect gift comes down from the Father of lights, in whom there is no change or shadow of shifting. I believe that. What father doesn't want good things for his kids? God wants us to have good things. I also understand that it is very dangerous to forbid things and make rules regarding things that perish, rules that, according to the end of Colossians 2, have an appearance of wisdom in promoting severity to the body, but are of no value in stopping the indulgence of the flesh. And as we saw in Matthew chapter 6, they could be fasting to satisfy their pride. So just giving up food doesn't mean you're not sinning in another way. I understand, according to 1 Timothy chapter 4, that it is deceitful spirits and teaching of demons that have led at least some to require abstinence from foods that God created to be received with thanksgiving by those who believe and know the truth. I understand that it is possible to fast motivated by pride, with a desire to parade one's self-righteousness. That is Matthew chapter 6, and those people will have their reward, and it will not be great. But there is a better reward. And some of that reward can come through the discipline of fasting, if we do it right. And I'm eager for that sort of reward. I would want you to be eager for that sort of reward. When we're talking about panting for God as the deer pants for flowing streams, to be satisfied with that living, flowing fountain, as Jeremiah talked about in Jeremiah 2, to have our mouths filled by him, fasting could help. Instead, around us, people pant for the Seahawks, or they pant for their friends' updates on some social media network. I mean, if you think about it in terms of when you have a moment to yourself, when you get a break, what you reach for to bring you a little hit of joy. Most of the time nowadays, it's pull to refresh on your piece of metal and glass in your pocket. This never happens to you, right? You don't take out your phone and you pull to refresh and you see the new things and then you pull to refresh again. It's been a good 15 seconds. Probably somebody has to have said something new that can spark my entertainment for a few more seconds until I can see the new ones again. You don't ever, with your email, right, just keep hitting refresh or check for new mail or whatever it says in your program or your app or service. I know I just did it 2 seconds ago, but probably in that last 2 seconds, now I'm going to get the thing that will just really be great news to my day. We don't ever think if I keep hitting this, I'm going to keep getting all the bad news all at once. It's going to be all the good news that are going to bring us some amount of happiness or joy to our day. So we pant for good grades, those who are younger and in school. We pant for work. We find our worth and satisfaction in what we have made or what we've accomplished. We pant for food. Like, if you watch commercials or listen to commercials on TV, McDonald's went for a really long time telling us what we deserved. You have had it hard. I'm sorry, my friend. You deserve a break today. Please come, be satisfied. We'll take your money to help, but please come be satisfied with what we can offer for your stomach. That should be your break. That's what you deserve. That's what will bring you enough happiness, joy, at least in a temporary way, till you have to come back through the drive-thru again to get some more. That's why they called it comfort food. That's why nobody eats half a gallon of ice cream at noon. It's always eating half a gallon of ice cream at like 11:15, when finally you got the kids to bed and finally your boss is off your back. Like, I need something good. And we turn to food. I can show you a picture on my phone if you care. When was it? 2001. I weighed 70 more pounds than I do now. And the picture is not pretty. We affectionately refer to the person in that picture as Fat Sean. And a lot of the reason why I gained my weight was because I was expecting food to bring me joy. And so I kept eating it. It's weird how that happens, and then you weigh lots of pounds. Piper says the weakness of our hunger for God is not because He is unsavory, but because we keep ourselves stuffed with other things. Another way to say it is the greatest enemy of hunger for God is not poison, but apple pie. The greatest adversary of love for God is not His enemies, but His gifts. Maybe not for everybody. I do think that there are idols that people are pursuing instead of the true God. But for most of us, we would tend to gravitate toward being satisfied with His stuff that probably we gave Him thanks for, rather than Him. So whether it's food, relationships, computers, gadgetry, internet, sports, music, movies, things that can be properly enjoyed in their place, too often we put those before God. Fasting is the kind of thing that can help us check that. So what is fasting? Here's a definition. And my outline for this session is going to be to take phrases from this definition and then kind of explain them. So altogether, fasting is a God-appointed means to humble ourselves and turn physical hunger for food towards spiritual hunger for God. That's a version probably, I don't think I got that straight from Piper's book. Maybe I did. I don't have quote marks around it in my notes. But it was definitely a lot driven by that book, Hunger for God. Fasting is a conscious choice to take away something that's usually good that we may be leaning on instead of God. Fasting says, I want God more than I want that good thing. Part of the problem in 1 Timothy 4, where Paul says that these deceitful spirits are teaching people to abstain from things, is they were starting to call those things not good. We're not talking about acting like food is not good. We're talking about recognizing that it is a good thing from God and temporarily not being satisfied with it. Fasting from food is the original idea. Food is good. It's a gift from God, more than good. You actually need food to keep physical life. And people usually respond to me when I talk about fasting from food. People usually say something to me like this: yeah, but I don't feel good when I don't eat. And I always say, yeah, I know. Or, depending on if it was a junior hire, I might say, duh. Yes, God made us to eat, made food to eat, made it to work in that process. The means to the end of our living is to eat food, yes. There are other things a person could give up for a time. The point is primarily to give up something that we're depending on to help us learn to depend on God more. And fasting and prayer then belong together. There isn't anything spiritual or godly in skipping a meal. Models and wrestlers skip meals. That doesn't make them closer to God. Feeling hungry is not sanctifying. If you've seen the Snickers commercials, you know that feeling hungry is not sanctifying. It typically works the other way. You need food to help with your sanctification. But fasting is using the physical pains and signals from our body to remind our body that it's not God. So rather than pandering and pampering our bodies, we discipline our bodies. And fasting is a way to show the body who is God and that the true God is a more rewarding master. So let's work through some of these phrases. It is a God-appointed means. In saying that fasting is God-appointed, I'm saying that God is the one who gave us instructions about it. It's not a human idea. God revealed instructions about fasting in His Word. He does not tell anyone to afflict their body in another way. God has never commanded His people to cut themselves. God has never commanded His people to prick themselves. God has never commanded His people to punch themselves or bruise themselves or hurt their bodies in any way. God has appointed not taking food for a period of time. There are some hunger pains that come along with it. That's different than inflicting pain on ourselves. We're not to pursue physical hurt or harm as a discipline. While we do have examples of giving up food for a while. Quickly, Old Testament saints fasted. In 2 Chronicles 20, Jehoshaphat was afraid when he heard that a great multitude is coming against him from Edom. They were close, and his response was not to call his generals or set the army in order, which would have been acceptable and appropriate responses. Instead, he, quote, set his face to seek the Lord and proclaimed a fast throughout all Judah. We need God's help. Let us focus our attention in seeking God's help, even by fasting. It was a way to focus the attention of a nation even towards God. God heard their prayers, promised that He would be with them, and told them, you will not need to fight in this battle. Stand firm, hold your position, and see the salvation of the Lord on your behalf. And this is the story when they went out the next morning, they looked toward the horde, and behold, there were dead bodies lying on the ground. None had escaped. It took them 3 days to gather the spoil, and none of them lifted a sword. They just didn't lift a spoon of food to their mouths. They trusted God. 2 Samuel 12, 15 through 25 is when David fasted for his newborn son that God had told him was going to die anyway as a punishment, but David fasted still, afflicted himself with fasting. Ezra 8, Ezra proclaimed a fast that the people would humble themselves before God to seek from Him a safe journey. It's when Ezra was going back from captivity to Israel to potentially start rebuilding, and he felt like it would be a bad testimony before the government leaders to ask for protection. So he fasted and called the people to fast, that God would protect them on their journey. Esther chapter 4, verse 16, Esther asked for all the Jews to fast with her for 3 days, night and day, before she entered the presence of the king, because if someone entered the presence of the king and he was not pleased with that, they could be killed. So, a variety of examples. Maybe most significantly is that Jesus himself fasted. We know in Matthew 4, Jesus fasted for 40 days and 40 nights before beginning his ministry. And Piper makes this observation. Here is Jesus standing on the threshold of the most important ministry in the history of the world. On his obedience and righteousness hangs the salvation of the world. None will escape damnation without the ministry of obedient suffering and death and resurrection. And God wills, at the very outset, this ministry be threatened with destruction, namely the temptations of Satan to abandon the path of lowliness and suffering and obedience. And of all the hundreds of things Jesus might have done to fight off this tremendous threat to salvation, he is led in the Spirit to fast. What prepared Jesus to deal with the temptations of the devil, the evil one, was an extended fast. We also, before beginning a time of ministry, need to be depending on God for his direction and strength. Perhaps fasting would be following Christ's example in that way. Not only did Jesus fast, Jesus taught about fasting. That was Matthew chapter 6. He talked about fasting again in Matthew chapter 9, verses 14 through 17, explaining about when the bridegroom was taken away, they will fast again. They're not fasting now because the bridegroom is with them, but they will fast again. In Matthew 6, just as he assumed that people would pray, he assumed that people would fast. When you fast, the early church fasted. Acts chapter 13, verses 2 and 3. While they were worshiping the Lord and fasting, the Holy Spirit said, "Set apart for me Barnabas and Saul for the work to which I have called them." Then after fasting and praying, they laid their hands on them and sent them off. When the gospel was on the precipice of being sent to the Gentiles through the Apostle Paul, here named Saul, the church was fasting before their initial missionary efforts. The church at Antioch was desiring to know the Lord's direction for their ministry, so they sought him in worship, in prayer, and in fasting. Even once they received the answer, they fasted again, and presumably for the sake of God's blessing on what he had directed them to do. Some people have argued that fasting is unnecessary after Pentecost and the coming of the Holy Spirit, but apparently not. Again, Jesus fasted. He taught his disciples to fast. The Holy Spirit hadn't come like at the beginning of Acts yet, but even in the book of Acts, the early church was doing that. On a practical note, the fact that we see in these God-appointed means and examples that groups were fasting must mean it's okay if other people know that you're fasting. Because you can't fast as a nation and then be like, I'm not doing it. Because you don't want to mess up the reward thing. As an even more specific personal practical note, it's really difficult to fast for any length of time and live in a family. So you come to the dinner table and everybody else is eating, and they ask you why you're not eating. No reason. So now you're lying to avoid them knowing about it. So when Jesus talked about other people not seeing you, it's what is the state of your heart? Who do you want the reward from? If you want the reward from people, then yes, tell them. If you want the reward from God, it doesn't mean that nobody else can know. It means don't seek your reward from the other people knowing. In many cases, you'll probably have to communicate it somehow. So it's a God-appointed means to humble ourselves and turn physical hunger for food. It's the next line. Hunger is God-given. It's actually a built-in survival mechanism. My wife's hunger mechanism doesn't work. I usually have to remind her to eat. She forgets about eating until it's too late. Then something kicks in, but it's not really a hunger mechanism. So most people, though, have hunger that comes up throughout the day. And it's actually really humbling to see how pathetic we are when we're hungry. It is for me. Because fasting surfaces dependencies that we have that are other than God. Perhaps more than any other discipline, fasting reveals the things that control us or what we are slaves to. Paul said in 1 Corinthians 6, "All things are lawful for me, but not all things are helpful. All things are lawful for me, but I will not be enslaved by anything." Food is meant for the stomach and the stomach for food, and God will destroy both one and the other. So food has a place, but food can't become our master, and fasting often reveals the measure of food's mastery over us. This is great. I don't know when he wrote this, but apparently he really liked Pizza Hut at the time. You know, he's one of the more frugal, wartime mentality, lifestyle people. Piper says, quote, "Just when my heart begins to retreat to the delicious hope of eating supper with friends at Pizza Hut, if that's possible, your delicious hope. Fasting quietly reminds me, not tonight. It can be a devastating experience at first. Will I find communion with God sweet enough and hope in His promises deep enough, not just to cope, but to flourish and rejoice in Him? Or will I rationalize away my need to fast and retreat to the medication of food? Try taking away something that we like or something that we've gotten used to having whenever we want, and it's humbling to realize how dependent we've become. Fasting reveals not only other than God dependencies, fasting reveals a lack of discipline, how selfish we can be. I remember when I first started trying to practice this spiritual exercise, being really surprised at how many times a day I thought about food. I mean, kind of the joke at our house is when we have one meal, the kids ask, well, what's for the next meal? But there's a thinking, well, I need to get through this, and then, all right, what's for lunch? Whether you brought it or you're going out or going home or you are at home and you got to make it or whatever it is. That's built in, that's right. It's a part of our culture, but I am a military surplus store of excuses about why I should get to eat when I said I was going to fast. Oh, I've got a headache. Oh, I've been anemic. Oh, I've really got a lot to do today. Oh, I don't want to be cranky. I have got excuse after excuse. I would sell my fasting birthright for a bowl of stew, literally. And it is humbling to see the lack of discipline, and it exposes weak spiritual hunger, which is really the primary question behind fasting. When was the last time the pain in my heart of missing time with God was as strong as the pain in my stomach because I'm missing food? And at the beginning, have I ever had a time where I felt a sense of lack of fellowship and time with God, satisfaction in God, like I feel when I am hungry? So that hunger of ourselves is to turn us towards spiritual satisfaction and appetite for God. This only happens by faith. You don't take physical hunger necessarily and then turn to God. Lots of people have starved and not become Christians from it. So what's required is when we take the physical discipline in order to turn it to spiritual hunger, that requires faith. And in fact, I thought a lot about including the words "in faith" in the definition of fasting, because any of our spiritual disciplines have to come from faith in our heart, otherwise they are going to be fruitless. So definitely requires faith to turn it toward spiritual hunger. which then can drive our thoughts towards God. If we're prepared, then when we have that moment of what's for lunch? Oh, I'm not eating lunch. Oh, I should pray. Then we are preparing ourselves to respond with Godward thoughts. It is herding our hunger thoughts towards the only open gate that we have allowed, which is, at this point, God. Fasting heightens our sensitivity to His many gifts. Usually, there's different ways to go about it, but usually people allow themselves to drink water at least during fasts. I typically do fasts where I allow myself a pot of coffee, and then the rest of the day it's water. Coffee totally seems like something that would be allowable in fasting. But it's just not eating anything. But if you're on any kind of extended fast, and then you sit down with your cup of water, it can really be an amazing experience. Like, wow. So, cold ice water. You know, this is also a parenthesis. Lots of people don't have ice. They don't have cold things. It's all lukewarm. Unless they heat it over the fire to make it really hot, they don't have refrigeration. Lots of people in church history obviously have not had refrigeration, but God gives us water, clean water, cold water, plumbed and bottled water, water everywhere. What a gift. And when we have temporarily put off most of the good things, then it can heighten our sensitivity to the good things we are acknowledging. Drinking water is just one of those possible ways. Fasting prepares us for times of want. There are only a very few times in my life that I've been hungry because of things outside of my control. There were some pretty lean eating times in college, like when I had to try to make macaroni and cheese in a coffee pot because it didn't even have a microwave, and at that point they didn't have those cool microwave packs that you could buy where it would boil your pasta and then all in one put the cheese in it. They didn't have those fancy things when I needed it. So most of the time, though, in my life, no matter how hard I'd been working, there was something to eat. But when we fast, it's not because we couldn't eat. It's because we're choosing to not eat. When our wallets and cupboards are full and we still choose God over the food, then I think we are disciplining ourselves to be dependent on Him. And the more we practice having God as our source of satisfaction, the more ready we'll be if and when resources do get tight. If there are times of want, the more we don't require or be slaves to resources when times are fat, the less tempted we'll be to complain when times are lean. And then fasting helps us feast better. I think about feasting and fasting at two different ends, but does one of them glorify God more than the other? Actually, both can be wrong and both can be great. You can feast in joyful thanks and celebration to God. You can fast in not eating and still joyfully celebrating what you have in God alone. And you can feast and ignore God, and you can fast and do it for self-righteous purposes. So it's not that not eating is more spiritual. It's that by faith there is a discipline connected to prayer that helps us seek our satisfaction in Him. When I am fasting, it prepares me to receive in thanks for the times of feasting even better. So there are some wrong reasons to fast, some practical things as we finish up this particular session. It is wrong to fast just to lose weight. oh, well, I went to this prayer seminar, and I got to thinking, I've got 10 to 15 extra just hanging around. And I could probably combine these two things, and, my pants would fit a little bit better again. Jesus didn't fast so that he could pull the belt tighter, right? They're not fasting. The God-appointed examples and instructions are not about getting rid of the extra fat. And by the way, it really doesn't work like that anyway, because what you're teaching your body to do is next time you're going to give it food, it's going to hold on to even more. So you make your body mad. No, you can't have anything right now. Your body says next time, okay, watch this. I'll store some for later for the next time when you don't let me have anything. So don't do it just to lose weight. Obviously, to parade self-righteousness, we've talked about this a few times already. Fasting does not earn God's favor or save anyone. We believe in justification by faith alone, and sanctification also comes by faith. So we're not earning something special from God. We are desiring him to be our satisfaction. So fasting done for any other reason than faith is worse than worthless. It's damnable. It's saying we can do something to please him that doesn't require faith by just being hungry. And that's not right. Also, I think it's a wrong reason to fast to seek God's special direction on something you're unclear about if you are purposefully doing something you already know he said not to do. So in Acts, when the early church was fasting to be able to know who they should send on the missionary journeys, if they would have been knowingly holding on to sin against God's revealed will, he already told them something to do and to not do, and they were rejecting that, then it would have been wrong for them to want some special revelation or direction on what to do on top of that. Well, you're not doing what I already told you. Why am I going to tell you something else? Like, start with what I said, pay attention to that, then there can be extra guiding or leading perhaps coming from these sorts of fasts. So in Isaiah 58, and Piper actually has a specific sermon and a chapter in his book all about this, the fasts of Israel were abominable to God because they failed to feed the hungry, house the homeless, and clothe the naked. And so God is speaking to them, do your fasts impress me? No, you're not doing what I already said. So some practical suggestions. I suggest me, not the Lord. No verse. Hence suggestions, not imperatives. That you start small. Like in session 3 about discipline, it isn't wise to run a marathon on your first day of exercise. You get really fired up. So let's say God's working in your heart right now, and you think, maybe I should try it. Please don't start with a 40-day fast. Or a 40-day juice fast or anything like that. Start small. As you want to consult a doctor before starting an exercise program at times, getting some ideas from someone with fasting experience could be fruitful. So beginning this discipline doesn't require the full 40-day extreme. I also suggest that you write out your plan, because fasting is hard and your stomach is going to growl. The head is going to ache. The muscles in the body will also potentially start to ache, and it will feel at some point soon into it, I think I made a mistake. I chose wrongly. Where is Taco Bell or, whatever, Pizza Hut? whatever it is. It will feel like it's not a good idea, and the mind is going to try to rationalize you to steal the reward. We tend to take the path of least resistance, and if we have written it out, then it gives our consciences another measure of accountability as we view those words we thought were a good idea at least some point in the past. Write it out. I would even list the reasons while you're writing it out, not going into the fast willy-nilly. Based on the biblical examples, most everyone had a reason or reasons for the fast. They desired deliverance or direction. They wanted something specific for God. You could fast for an unsaved family member. You could fast for an upcoming decision or ministry commitment. You could even fast for the purpose of learning to hunger for God more. Describe the nature and duration of your fast. This is just being more specific on writing out the plan. By the nature of the fast, I mean what it is you're choosing to give up. Maybe it's not food. If you are a diabetic and you take insulin shots and that requires a certain amount of sugar, please do not tell your doctor that I told you you had to not eat food for some long period of time. So there are situations where maybe you want to give up something else that is good, that fills up your time. Fasting is not giving up sin. You're supposed to give up sin anyway. It's giving up something good, some gift that God has given for a period of time. Then also decide what you're going to allow yourself to have. Water, juice, coffee, nothing, maybe a combination of things. And by duration, I mean how long you're giving up that thing. There's no biblically required length of a fast. There are examples of fasts in the Bible from 24 hours, from after dinner to dinner the next day. There are 3-day fasts and 40-day fasts. And then, fifth, make sure you schedule some specific times of prayer throughout that fasting duration. The point of not eating lunch on Tuesday is not going to be so you can answer some more email or get some extra papers filed or make those extra calls. It is to turn the physical hunger towards spiritual appetite. The reason I think fasting works, the reason God rewards fasting is because He loves, one word, depending on Him. And prayer is an opportunity to depend on Him, to communicate that dependence to Him. So when you come to break fast, have you ever thought about that before? I think I was in my 30s before I realized what breakfast meant. You are breaking your fasting every night unless you sleepwalk to the kitchen refrigerator. So all of us are fasting while we're sleeping. When you come to break fast, whatever the duration you set, especially for your first one, this is my experience. Probably there's not going to be a parade for how you survived. Your family's not going to throw you a party. Woohoo, way to go! Like maybe, if you're all into it, I suppose. Nobody is going to mention the accomplishment. You probably should not Instagram it. But there will be a joyful peace that you have committed some time to focus on your hunger for God. And there will be satisfaction in Him, even if it's not loud. Piper says, God is committed to rewarding those acts of the human heart that signify human helplessness and hope in God, and fasting is one of those things. So if you are a grunt, I would invite you to give up breakfast and lunch one day a week for a month. Don't Don't choose it on the day that all of your office buddies go out to lunch. So that's Friday. Like, choose another day than that. Oh, I'm sorry. Can't leave the tip today. I'm not eating because of God. So choose the day. Just give up breakfast and lunch. So suggestion. Warriors, you might want to consider other things than food that could be distracting to you as well. So give them up along with skipping meals. I got to the point where most of my fasts included giving up food and checking email until I was done with the fast. I don't have one of those jobs where like people send me emails saying I need to push the red button to fire the missile against the attacking, country's planes. I don't have one of those jobs where I'm getting urgent life and death emails that can't last for a day or so. And they would call me or text me anyway if they really wanted my attention. But I found, there's lots of things to distract myself from being hungry looking through emails. And hey, people ask me questions, I should respond. So giving up something else in addition to the food may also be wise as well. Okay, that's the end of this session. Just one more to go. And if you're feeling like you're getting tired, this last one is all about our persistence and our determination. So we'll have to apply that first by just surviving the seminar, and then in our praying after that.